Everything you have been told about closure is wrong. The checkpoint is going to prove that to you in the next 20 minutes. You have been told closure is something the other person has to give you. A final conversation, a real apology, an explanation that finally makes the math add up. A clean ending. You have been told that once you receive one of those things, the chapter closes by itself. The checkpoint will tell you something different. Closure is not a conversation. It is not an apology. It is not a sentence the other person says that releases you. Closure is a document, and the only person who can sign it is you. Most people spend years waiting for a co-signer who is never going to pick up the pen. By the end of this video, you will know the 5 fake versions of closure you have been chasing. You will know why each one keeps failing in the same way. And you will know what closure actually is and what it costs to issue it to yourself on a Tuesday afternoon with no one watching. Before the checkpoint inspects the 5 false passports, one thing has to be said clearly. You did not invent the version of closure that has been costing you years. You inherited it. The word closure did not exist in common emotional language for most of human history. Before the late 20th century, when someone lost a relationship, lost a parent, lost a job, lost a home, the word for what they did with the loss was simply grief. Then the talk show era arrived. The therapy magazine era arrived. The breakup podcast era arrived. And a new word got installed into the dictionary of the heart: closure. The word came with a story. The story was, the wound stays open until the other party closes it for you. They have to apologize. They have to explain. They have to admit. They have to acknowledge. They have to walk back into the room you have been waiting in and say the sentence that turns the lock. The checkpoint has watched this story do more quiet damage than almost any other emotional story of the last 50 years. Because it puts the key to your own door inside someone else's pocket, and it tells you the door cannot open until they decide to walk back. They are not walking back. They were never walking back. And while you are waiting at the door, the rest of your life is happening in a hallway you refuse to step into. Most people never notice this. The checkpoint has seen 5 disguises that closure wears. Each one looks like the real thing. Each one feels like the real thing in the moment. Each one fails 6 months later in the exact same way. The checkpoint will name all 5. False passport 1, the final conversation. This is the closure you keep rehearsing in the shower. The one where you finally sit them down. You finally say the sentence you have been carrying for months. They finally hear it, and something shifts. Almost every person who has ever tried this conversation has reported the same thing afterward. They said the sentence. The other person heard the sentence, and nothing shifted. Or worse, the conversation went sideways. The other person defended themselves. The apology came out wrong, and now the wound has fresh language attached to it. The checkpoint will tell you why this happens. The final conversation does not work because the conversation was never the lock. The conversation was just the door you kept staring at. The actual lock was further inside. You did not need them to hear the sentence. You needed yourself to stop carrying the sentence. Those are two different decisions, and only one of them belongs to you. False Passport 2, the apology that settles it. This is the closure where you imagine that the right apology, said in the right tone, with the right specificity of acknowledgement, would finally release you. The checkpoint is not going to argue with the apology. There are people in your life who owe you a real apology. The debt is real. The problem is not that the apology is undeserved. The problem is that even if the apology arrived tomorrow morning, exactly worded, exactly delivered, it would not do what you think it would do. The checkpoint has watched this happen many times. The apology arrives. The other person says the right words. And the viewer who waited 3 years for those exact words feels almost nothing. Then they feel angry that they feel almost nothing because they realize for the first time that the apology was never carrying the weight. They were. The apology, once it actually arrives, is just a wet stamp on a document you already wrote. False Passport 3, the explanation that makes sense. This is the closure you have been looking for in the late night scrolls, in friends' interpretations, in podcasts about narcissists, attachment styles, avoidant partners, anxious partners, trauma bonds, parts, work, and personality disorders. The closure where finally, at last, you understand why they did it, why they left, why they chose her, why they stopped calling, why they treated you the way they did. The checkpoint will say this directly. The mind looks for explanation because explanation feels like control. If you can name the cause, you can predict the future. If you can predict the future, the body relaxes. The problem is that no explanation has ever been clean enough to actually settle the body. There is always one more variable, one more theory, one more late-night insight that almost makes the math add up, but not quite. So you keep researching, and the research feels like progress. The explanation that makes sense is closure that runs on a hamster wheel. Every revolution feels like motion. None of the revolutions move you forward. You are not still confused. You are still waiting for the explanation to do something it was never built to do. False Passport 4, the I am over them test. This is the closure where you decide you have moved on because you can hear their name without flinching, or you can drive past their street without crying, or you can see their photo without checking your pulse, or you can run into a mutual friend without your jaw tightening for the rest of the evening. Those are real signs of something. They are not signs of closure. They are signs that the body has finally negotiated a quieter way to carry the weight. There is a difference between the wound being closed and the wound being numb. The checkpoint has watched many people fail this test the moment one new piece of information arrives. A photo, a mutual friend's update, a song in a grocery store, a wedding announcement, and the entire interior they thought was settled is on the floor again. If your closure can be undone by a single song in aisle 4, it was never closure. It was distance. Distance is useful. Distance is sometimes necessary. But distance is not the document. Distance is just the room you walked into to get away from the document. False Passport 5, the last time ritual. This is the closure you try to issue through a final visit, a final text, a final drive past the old apartment, a final email you write but do not send, a final scroll through the old photos. The closure where you go back one more time, look at the place, take the breath, and decide that this exact moment is the official end. The checkpoint has watched these rituals do real work occasionally. They are not always wrong. But for most people, the last time ritual is the closure equivalent of trying to sign your own discharge papers in someone else's handwriting. The body knows the ritual was a performance. The body remembers what the body was actually doing during the ritual. And 6 weeks later, the body sends the same urge back, dressed in a slightly newer outfit. One more last time. This one will count. It does not count. The last time ritual will keep being last until you stop trying to make a building, a text, or a drive carry a decision that only you can make. 5 false passports. The checkpoint has now inspected each one. Notice the pattern. Each one is built on the same architecture. The final conversation says, closure arrives when they hear me. The apology says, closure arrives when they own it. The explanation says, closure arrives when I understand them. The over them test says, closure arrives when I no longer feel them. The last time ritual says, closure arrives when I perform the ending correctly. Every single one assumes that closure is something that arrives from the outside, from them, from the right ritual, from the right insight, from the right amount of time. The checkpoint will say this as plainly as the language allows. There has never been an external event that closed an internal chapter. There has only ever been an internal decision dressed up to look like the external event was the cause. You have been outsourcing the signature for years to a person, to a feeling, to a podcast, to a moment, to a calendar. The signature was never theirs to give. Here is the real issue. So if closure is not a conversation, not an apology, not an explanation, not numbness, and not a ritual, what is it? The checkpoint will give you a working definition. Closure is the moment you stop sending invoices to a debtor who is never going to pay. Read that again slowly. Closure is the moment you stop sending invoices to a debtor who is never going to pay. Notice what that definition does and does not require. It does not require the debtor to apologize. It does not require the debtor to explain. It does not require the debtor to come back into the room. It does not even require the debtor to know you have stopped sending the invoices. It only requires you to decide that the ledger is now closed on your side. The other side may stay open forever. That is not the part that matters. The checkpoint has seen many people refuse this definition because it sounds like surrender. It is not surrender. Surrender would be saying the debt was not real. Closure is saying the debt was real, and you are no longer willing to spend the next 10 years waiting at the cashier's window for a deposit that will never arrive. Closure is not absolving them. Closure is unsubscribing yourself from a subscription only you were paying for. The checkpoint will tell you why this definition is so hard for the body to accept. Because the body, very reasonably, does not want to write off a real debt. The body says, if I close this ledger without ever being repaid, doesn't that mean what they did to me was free? The body says, if I stop waiting for the apology, doesn't that mean I am letting them off the hook? The body says, if I close this chapter without their participation, doesn't that mean none of it counted? These are honest questions. The checkpoint will answer each of them honestly. No, the closure does not make what they did free. The cost was already paid by you in the years you spent carrying the open ledger. No, the closure does not let them off the hook. The hook they are on is their own. It was never yours to release them from. No, the closure does not mean none of it counted. It means it counted enough that you are no longer willing to spend the next 10 years recounting it. The checkpoint has watched something very specific happen in the body when a person finally accepts these answers. The chest does not lift dramatically. The eyes do not light up. The relief is not cinematic. There is just a small, quiet, almost embarrassing realization. Oh, I have been the one keeping this open this whole time. I thought I was waiting for them. I was waiting for me. I waited 11 months for an apology I was never going to receive. I called it holding them accountable. It was not holding them accountable. It was the only way I had let myself stay close to something I could not bring myself to walk away from. The day I finally noticed that, I was angrier at the 11 months than I was at the original wound. The checkpoint did not always sit on this side of the line. There was a closure the checkpoint waited for that never came. The checkpoint stopped waiting for it on a Tuesday afternoon in a kitchen in a moment so unspectacular that no one would ever have made a movie about it. That is what closure actually looks like. The checkpoint has noticed something almost no one writes about clearly. Every real closure in the history of the human heart has been signed alone, not in front of the person, not in a final conversation, not at a ceremony, in a kitchen, in a parked car, on a walk, in a bathroom at 3 a.m., at a desk on a Sunday afternoon. The reason is not poetic. The reason is structural. Closure is the one document the other person was never going to be in the room for. If they were going to be in the room for it, the relationship would not have arrived at the place where closure was needed in the first place. So stop waiting for them to be in the room. The room you are sitting in right now is the one the document was always going to be signed in. Whether you sign it today or in 11 more months is the only variable left. Here is the practice. It is short. The shortness is not a shortcut. It is the shape closure actually takes. The previous practices the checkpoint has given have been catalog practices. Name the cargo, name the era, name the contract. This one is different. This one is a single sentence, written with an ordinary pen, on an ordinary piece of paper, in an ordinary room. Sit down somewhere quiet. Take out a piece of paper. At the top of the paper, write the name of the person, the relationship, the chapter, or the version of yourself you have been waiting to receive closure from. Below the name, write one sentence in your own handwriting, in the present tense. The sentence is, "The ledger is closed on my side." Then write the date. Then write your own name underneath. Then sign it. That is the entire practice. You are not closing it because they earned it. You are not closing it because they apologized. You are not closing it because the explanation finally made sense. You are closing it because you are the only signature the document was ever waiting for. The checkpoint will tell you what happens next. In the body, when the signature lands on the page, most of the time, nothing dramatic happens. There is just a small registering, a faint noticing that something that was open is now technically closed, even if the feeling has not caught up yet. The feeling will catch up. The feeling almost always catches up to the signature, eventually, if the signature was honest. What does not work is signing the document and then reopening the ledger every time a memory shows up. A song in a grocery store is not a reopening. It is a visit. Visits are allowed. Visitations are not invoices. The document stays signed. That is the whole point of signing it. That is the practice. The checkpoint has noticed that closure documents are easier to sign in a quiet room than in a noisy one. Drift Inward is the small, private room the checkpoint built for exactly this kind of decision. A place to write the name, write the sentence, sign the date, and do it without an algorithm reaching over your shoulder to remind you of one more reason to keep the ledger open. It is not a cure. It is a quiet desk in a loud century. The ruling. Closure was never something they were going to give you. It was always a document waiting for your signature. Stop waiting for the co-signer. Pick up the pen.